these topics are particularly important because there's a lot more on next year. You'll find a frame for it. And the frame is this. This is a diagram that represents a way to hold the things we learned about successful practice with kids in our profession.
Is there any chance that you can do that on top?
Don't have one of these speakers here. But if you move up to this table here, I'll make sure I can move so you can see it also. I don't mind if you did move it.
I can work on getting the strings now. You did last time, it was much better. So I don't know about that.
This diagram is a way to address some way to sort out the comprehensive need for all the things that are important for successful. Summarize the knowledge base. And it says that there are certain jobs that we all have in common, certain tasks that every one of us has to handle in the conduct of our work as a classroom teacher. In the upper left-hand corner of the box, it says tasks, repertoire, and action. So these are some of the tasks. You and I have to maintain the attention of the students and keep it focused on the curriculum relevant material. It's a job we all have. Doesn't matter how old the kids are, what the grade level is, what the content is. This one has to do with keeping the flow of events moving and avoiding downtime, delay, conflict, confusion over direction, conflict over materials. Also particularly in transition times. Similarly, having routines that are efficient, sometimes embed inherent teaching routine, clean up that has a routine that embeds responsibility in it. But these are tasks we all have to handle that are different from management tasks. This one is getting ideas clear and accessible for all of the students. There are some tasks, I'm not going to go through all of them, just to show you how this topic fits into the bigger frame of what we've been undertaking this year and will be undertaking in subsequent years in the district. These are quite different in nature. This one says personal relationship building. That's a task of teaching. Some people pay more attention to it than others, but you can't not do it. Whether you pay attention to it or not, you are, I am, building relationships of one sort or another with kids. They may be neutral, they may be negative, they may be positive. All of these boxes are up here because they influence how the learning goes. They're just very different from one another in how they influence the way the learning goes. You know, if classroom climate, in which this district has made a big investment in recent years, preparing community and responsive classroom, isn't just niceness. It actually correlates with how much the students learn. And here's another collection of tasks that bear on successful teaching. They're the top part of the triangle that I can't make come up right now because my machine is rebelling against me. Let's see. There's 4 different ways to tell us to go up. I'm now on the 4th one. Thank God. I was out of options. This is a typical teacher moment, right? What do you do when you're out of options? These are skills, areas of performance, tasks that aren't so easily observable in classroom because most of them happen at night. Planning lessons. Picking from the 3 activities or learning experiences that you know, the one that will be most successful for you. Figuring out how to frame the objective so that kids know what it is and can name themselves. Now, this is a sort of a comprehensive map of the areas of performance that comprise generic pedagogy. And today, I'm going to just be focusing on one of them, the ones in blue. Particularly the one that says expectations / effort-based ability. So this is a nice little graphic. Shows it blown up. Now, let me get right to the bottom of that. That area of performance, that area of skill, has to do with sending 3 critical expectation messages to all of our students. And the messages are these. First, what we're doing is important. Second, You can do it. You can do it. And the third message is, and I'm not going to give up on it, because you give up on yourself. Now that all our kids get those messages, makes a huge difference in their belief in themselves, their investment in school, and their academic achievement. And the messages don't get sent by matter, they don't get sent by osmosis, they get sent by things people say and do. So that is an area of performance, as it were, or a task of teaching that is really very, very different from being able to explain something or having good classroom routines that are efficient. It's one way sometimes of talking to citizen audiences. I try and underline the point that interactive classroom teaching is the most complex, most sophisticated profession imaginable. And to understand it in all its complexity really should refocus national policy, but I'll get out of the pulpit on that one for the moment. You know, our profession is organized as if all you have to do is have a college degree and be literate and like kids, and then you can pick up the rest on the job. That's like saying, let's take a fourth-year medical student and put him in the operating theater with brain surgery. It is recognized that the complexity of other high-status professions requires continual study and ever deeper knowledge in how to do what we do. Part, I think, of the future of our profession is getting our voting public to recognize it. But anyway, this is just one slice of that skill base, but it is hugely important, and it's how different it is from being a good, environmental engineer, that's the classroom management, or cognitive science, knowing how to do modeling, thinking aloud, which about 8 or 9 of you did with me last time. That's out of the green ones in the middle of this previous diagram. So, this area of knowledge is about how we send that message, how we send it in behavior, how it shows up in everyday classroom behavior. Now, I'm going to show you 1 minute. I know the two of you have seen before from other work you're doing with me. And I'm going to ask you how is what is going on in this class sending kids those 3 messages. Now, here's the situation. It's a middle school social studies class, and the teacher has said to the kids, oh, by the way, you read about this last night. What's the definition of natural resources? So she calls up one kid and he says, well, like it's bark and trees. Well, that's not really a complete definition of natural resources, but it's a half-right answer that the kind of which we get many times during the day. So this is 1 minute long, and my question for you is, what's going on here that has anything to do with how a person might be sending those messages to kids? Now this ornery computer shut off the audio between setting up and now.
Okay. What's your question 1 for us? Go ahead, and you can answer that question. Okay. Trees and examples. Things you find on Earth. There's a piece of that. You're going to add one more piece of that to help us understand it. So right now, what you define the part of is nature. You want to call on someone to help you get it to natural resources? That people can use. So put it all together in one, the great definition. Natural resources is something about the nature that they can use. We're going to see the difference? So can you say it? Natural resources are things that people can use. Now you're missing the cool part you had before. Things you find on Earth and things that people can use. Things you find on Earth that people can use.
table talk for a minute. What's going on there that struck you that was interesting or significant? Or that in any way could be? This is a high-gain teacher. Our kids gain more every year. And there's a tiny little clue about that in this little transaction. What do you think it is? What's going on there? Table talk, go. Can I call you back, folks? Let me finish out and start us off. What? Just talk to your table about how the discussion went, what you know. Yeah. Yours about it.
The process of conversing.
No, I mean, what did you see in the clip?
Oh, I would talk about several things. One that was mentioned, there was that the teacher did not give up on the student that did it first. And several times I noticed the process of having a child then call on someone else in the classroom.
Let me stop you there. What does that accomplish when you get the kid to call on somebody else rather than you calling on somebody else?
Power.
Some influence, some control. Keep going.
And also, and there's several things I can join on with that student calling on someone else. And if someone mentioned the teacher had set up a climate in the classroom that someone could do that, and it wasn't just a popularity contest, it was a sense of collaboration and safety in that process. And then I think I mentioned a little bit about how to reframe the response in going back, which is an extra step, and reframing it with the subject matter, the whole process of a complete sentence, when we want students to frame answers and written responses to show us questions. And so that also, the cognitively gets it sort of embedded in there as well, in that reframing and realizing concepts.
Very nice. As a summary of the points I heard, collectively actually involved. You've got your few minutes back. Just be summary. Thank you. I just want to dwell on a few of those points. The skill is called persevere and return. And it includes getting the students to whom you return to speak in academic language in full sentences with a subject and a verb. No short answers when you're doing this skill. No one-word answers. So, persevere and the term is meant to capture the idea that if a kid half answers a question, you do whatever you have to do to get the right information, produce it somehow, but you go back to that kid. And the signal is, and you make that kid synthesize all the stuff so that the kid emerges triumphant rather than as the remedial kid who needs to be bailed out. Now, the question that you asked is an important one for us to consider. Just say that for everybody, would you, about what you mean better?
Yeah, I wondered about going back to him, and she didn't let him off the hook even when he tried again, and did a much better job. She had him then, you don't have the good stuff, and I just was thinking about in my practice, like, can that be stuff picking on a kid a little bit, or maybe drawing too much attention to stuff they're not getting right? And I just asked the question that I
Thank you. It's a legitimate question to ask, and I want to put one little stake in the ground on that. The risk is if you don't come back to them, they conclude you don't think they could have done it. And whatever temporary discomfort may be present is worth it, because when it's a consistent pattern, the kids know that you're not picking on them, that you're doing it out of confidence. And I think that there are, unfortunately, I rarely see this, and I think the intent to prevent embarrassment is the motive why one wouldn't do it, unless it's the motive to cover and keep moving fast. But the flaw in that is this business of, now, you said she's created a climate. She has indeed, and it's because there's lots of other things like this that go on all the time that are part of her interactive dialogue with them. And the message is sent, a mistake is not a confirmation of your dumbness. Mistakes are opportunities for learning. Now, underneath, I'll back up half a sentence. This handout here, what you just saw is number 4. It's called Dealing with Errors, persevere and return. The the title of the handout is 40 places where you would see a person acting or a school making policy decisions if they wanted every moment of a child's life in your school to be sending those messages in one way or another. Now, in a sense, that's the extended playbook for places to look and things to learn about it. And, we could do an entire 7-day course just on those things, looking at video clips and seeing what they add up to. That's one kind of rule. What I want to spend our time on today is the belief system underlying the willingness to do these things. There is in this country a view about academic ability, which is represented by that picture, the bell curve. And that is a view which happens to be stronger and more dominant in this country than any other nation on earth. It's not the only place where people have that view of ability and intelligence, but it's stronger here than elsewhere. And sometime when we have more time together, I'll show you the evidence for that. But this view of ability says that it is a thing. It's concrete, it's a reified entity. And it's inborn. It comes with the package when you emerge from your mother's womb. However much of it you've got, however, is however much you'll ever have. It's fixed. It's unalterable. And unfortunately, some of us have more of it than others. Some of us are on the fortunate end and others are not. It does determine how you're going to do in life. There's no doubt about that. But fortunately, we can measure it. We can find out how much of it you've got. And we can create an appropriate educational environment for you. Now, you can tell there's a little edge to my voice. And that is because, despite the fact that I believed this most of my life, I don't anymore. And I think that given enough time, I can convince you it's wrong. It's flat out wrong. And that is a very challenging idea, as it has been for me the rest of it. Because you can't grow up in this country without believing that. We inhale it at the dinner table, just listening to the conversation about people who lie, or people that our parents run into. So what I want to propose is that there's another view about ability. And it's actually achieving a loose currency these days. You probably read about it every now and then in blogs or in websites. Sometimes it's called the malleable ability, or the incremental ability view. Carol Dweck is an author very much associated with this. Does that name ring? Nod your head if her name Carol Dweck rings a bell. DWEC. 35 years of in-depth research at Columbia University and Stanford for the past 3 years. Now, this is a diagram that represents the alternative view. One is locked and one's open. It says this: if you get me as one of your students to exert effective effort a little bit more, in a little bit more savvy way than I have before, and I get an increment of achievement, and I notice it, or you point it out to me, that gives me confidence that I didn't have before, and it becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. This is not as an argument to say there is no such thing at all as ability that might be different between humans. It's just to say that it's a minor factor in relation to effective effort in determining how one turns out, or how one does it in math, or how one does it anything. What in fact is needed in order to have effective effort is a combination of hard work and strategies. I want to emphasize the word combination. Hard work is fine, and that is an issue for a lot of our students. And for many of the more low-confidence, low-performing students, they have had episodes of hard work, perhaps in their early childhood years, but they didn't seem to make any progress, so they've given up. Hard work doesn't help you if you keep your head against the wall in the same way you did before. It wasn't strategic or effective. So strategies that will work are what's missing, as well as sometimes prior knowledge. Now that's the alternative view. And one must, in order to look at the range of kids in our class and start believing that we could get some of the consistently low performing, low confidence kids, especially those who may come from disruptive homes or from disadvantaged backgrounds, to actually close the achievement gap and not be overcome by life circumstances, requires that we at least challenge ourselves to look at these two beliefs and at least suspend disbelief in order to try out some of the effective effort teaching behaviors, one of which we just looked at. So I want to spend a few minutes going a little bit more deeply into this notion of these two beliefs and see where you wind up on. This is a belief that says ability is malleable, and there are a number of research traditions which give very challenging information to back up that belief that ability is malleable. And I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. This slide says that once I start at least permitting myself to consider the possibility that it's true that academic ability can be grown, then it's going to show up in certain practices in my teaching, like the one we looked at that I didn't do so much before. It's also going to show up in policies and procedures in the school, like grading practices, allowing kids to read and get the highest grade they got instead of averaging. And it's going to show up in the way we talk to each other in PLC teams, when we put the kids' work on the table and decide whether we're going to reteach or not, to whom and how much effort we're going to put into doing that. Okay, so let me skip ahead a little bit to some of these interesting pieces of data. One thing that I would like to give you as a reference, because we don't have time to look at it today, is that there's a video on our website called Unraveling the Myth of the Bell Curve. It is a history of how the idea of intelligence being fixed and unchangeable got so rooted in the United States in a way that's different from any other country. It's a fascinating history to look at because there's a tradition of people that starts in England with Galton, who was a student of Darwin and the founding of societies to identify why gifted people are gifted, and it moves into social Darwinism, for those of you who are kind of interested in the intellectual history of ideas and how they evolve. It includes the creation of the first test by Alfred Binet, a Frenchman, its importation to these shores. It includes Alfred Binet saying out loud over and over again, there is no such thing as intelligence. It's the guy whose name is associated with that. I never intended it to be used for these purposes. The most important thing is will, W-I-L-L, desire, ganas. We didn't, he was a French, but he didn't say ganas. But it's a fascinating history, and the birth of intelligence doesn't coincide with the Industrial Revolution, the need to sort people for jobs in the workplace, social Darwinism, which says people rise because they're superior, and the eugenics movement in the United States, which says let's sterilize people who are not going to breed the smart, capable people. It's a dark, actually, period, right up through the 1930s. But it will give you pause about how much sway it has, because the circumstances that collided historically here were different from what was going on in most of the rest of the world. So this is the video on the RBT website that gives you that history. Here, and these are the four things that I just mentioned. Those are some of the Binet quotes. What I'm scrolling forward for is some of this challenging data. Here's the first one. IQ scores in this country have risen 9 points per generation since 1932. Measured IQ scores. Now, of course, none of us knew that, including me, until a guy named Flynn in New Zealand in the late 1990s did it by one of these meta-analyses, showed that it was true. It's called the Flynn effect. We don't know it because they renorm the test every decade. When you renorm a test, you take the scores which have shifted up, and you take the distribution in the middle, that's the biggest, and you call it 100. So even though it was actually 109, now you're going to have to say, that many right answers will now call that 100. That's renorming the test, and they do it every 10 years, so that the bell curve keeps its shape. And the number in the high middle is 100. But it's true that IQ scores have been rising in terms of absolute number of right answers per population sample every generation. Now, how could that be true? What could account for that? Is it, on the East Coast, we have fluoride in the water. Thinks the fluoride in the water? You don't have fluoride here, but your IQ score has been rising too. Protein? What is it? What could account for IQ scores rising?
Good teachers.
Ah, well now, you're actually closer than you might have thought. More people go to school for more years steadily every decade. Could it be that the amount of schooling you have in some way correlates with IQ tests? Well, look at IQ tests consist of subtests. There's a general information subtest in the Stanford Binet and also in the Wexler. There are vocabulary subtests. The things that are tested in intelligence tests, so goes the hypothesis of David Berliner, and I agree with, are subject to educability. Because if you look at what is, there is IQ tests were created by experimentation with things that would differentiate people. And so at the turn of the century, we had less than 10% of graduates from elementary school who even started high school. And now we have an average national graduation rate from high school of 79 to 80%. So that's one plausible explanation for why IQ scores are rising. There's nothing happening that's changing brain structure, unless you want to argue that the video game culture of the modern era is something. What's changing, however, is the level of literacy in things that IQ tests measure. So that's one challenging finding. Here's another finding. There are programs that have set out to increase children's IQ score by training in some of the things that are in the subtests. They came in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s from people in the creativity movement. Anyway, they show stable increases in intelligence scores for the kids who have been in those programs, measured intelligence scores. And the one that impressed me the most is twin studies. Throughout the 20th century, there were studies of twins who were orphaned and adopted by different families. And when you have a high SES family and a low SES family, from children who are identical genetically, there's as much as 20 points difference. So if nature versus nurture, who's winning here? The language-rich environment, the problem-solving skills that come from a middle-class environment show up in something that happened because of the environment the kids were raised in, rather than what was inborn. Anyway, another really strong argument against IQ or academic ability being fixed. David Perkins, one of our foremost researchers, has demonstrated that if you look at IQ scores and kids' grades in school, you cannot make those IQ scores account for any more than a quarter of the variability in grades. A couple of more facts. This is a fact. Whenever one studies people who are thought to be geniuses, science, mathematics, music, art, performance of any kind, what you find is that they have invested at least 10,000 hours in practicing how to do that particular thing. And that from a very young age, they hardly did anything else but practice that particular thing. This even pertains to people who are obviously, I put it in quotes, geniuses, like Mozart. From the age of 4 onward, Mozart did nothing else but music 12 hours a day. And one of the reasons for it is that his father viewed him as the meal ticket for the family. He was a child prodigy, trained and developed to travel to Europe and be a prodigy. You could get more money as a prodigy when you play the piano like he could. And this is not to deny that there were maybe have been special things about Mozart, but no matter whom you examine, who has gone on to world-class success and demonstrable performance of some sort in any field, they always turn out to be people who did it an incredibly long amount of time with incredible amounts of practice. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team. There is a book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. Every single chapter is the life story and the case history of a person like this, whom we view as unnatural. Our language, therefore, listen, when you go home tonight and tomorrow as you go through your life, listen to the words we use which echo this bell curve view of things. The baseball movie with called The Natural. Who was the star of that? The vocabulary of the movie, the story, everything in it reinforces the notion that he emerged from his mother's womb with a terrific ability to pitch and hit home runs. The last one of which knocks out the highlights at the top of the stadium, even though it's bleeding to his whole womb. So we make heroic the naturalness of one's ability. He lays off baseball for 15 years and he can still come back and play like that, right? Oh, wacky. I love it. But it ain't the way of the world. But we are all convinced it is, and it's so attractive that we even love movies that glorify it. He's the wounded hero as well as the natural. So that's Malcolm Gladwell's book, is the evidence of that. There's a woman named Angela Duckworth who has a wonderful video on YouTube right now. She presented a TED Talk. You know what TED Talks are?
Yeah.
And so you can see it on TED Talks or get it on YouTube. Google Angela Duckworth. It's a video. Her specialty is what she calls grit, meaning persistence. And what she shows is that she's another one who provides evidence that Malcolm Gladwell does. That anybody who is successful to an extraordinary degree always has this life history. There is also, by the way, a literature on resilient children. This is a little PS, only slightly off to the side. These are children who succeed in school and in life despite the most horrible life circumstances, when all those around them didn't. And what it always surfaces is that there was one adult in their life who was significant to them. Sometimes a teacher, sometimes a relative, sometimes a neighborhood mentor. And that adult expressed those three messages. Being successful and having integrity is important. You can do it. I'm not going to give up on you. You are able. The belief of another adult is what made the difference and enabled that kid to practice what we know. All the characteristics of resilience. And I bet, I'm not going to take a poll, but I bet there's somebody in this room who wouldn't be here today. If they're doing what you do, if there hadn't been somebody in your life like that. Pardon? Yeah. When we do more extended, in-depth work around this, we really build a, you term your caring community amongst ourselves, and we would share more openly stories about that. But it's important to get the testimony of evidence about that. I'll do something with you now that's a little related to it. I'll give you this last piece of data, and then we'll do an exercise. This one, this is the argument against the notion that intelligence is inherited. It runs in families. Smart people have smart kids, and those kids are going to give me smart grandkids. Thank God. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on this. It's just that the main point, when you really look into this notion that intelligence is inherited, is the answer is, so what? Heritability says nothing about malleability. And here is a graph that represents the meaning of that statement. This is a study I came across once before I found the ones that said the same thing about IQ scores. The point, this is about the height, altitude, tall you grow, of a father of Japanese men who live in Japan. And then they come to the United States and they have their sons. And then their sons have sons. So, this is a line. A, that's family A. The father from Japan, the grandfather in Japan, the father in the United States, the grandson in the United States. And what you see here is that as soon as kids spend their whole life being raised in this country with this nutrition, they grow a whole lot taller, a whole lot faster. Much taller than their father or their grandfather. The sequence, however, of relative height remains associated with the family bloodline. So the A family that was taller in Japan tends to remain taller than the D family, but the difference is dwarfed by the elevation in height that happened as a result of living in a different nurturing environment, in a different caloric environment. Now, so the heritability still exists. Tall people tend to have taller people, and short people have short people. But if you change the environment enough, you can overwhelm the influence of heritability by the actual growth in height. Does that make sense? So the same thing pertains to IQ, and I won't go into the IQ scores. The twin studies certainly illustrate that. All right, so all of this data is meant to challenge this belief that the bell curve is the truth, and that a student's performance, and here's the generalization that's always applied by it. A student's performance today is usually correlated with their academic ability, and it ain't going to change. If it ain't going to change, that's, and I, out of good-heartedness, out of conviction, I accept that. Then out of good-heartedness, my treatment of the students tends to go more toward accommodation, protection, ensuring small increments of success to allow the child to preserve their self-esteem. Whereas if I come from the other effort-based ability one, I say, this kid has given up, or this kid doesn't believe he or she is smart enough. In fact, I have to convince them that what's missing is not brain power. What's missing is prior knowledge, strategies, and knowing how to exert effective effort. How to do it. And it becomes my job to teach them that. Now, the bell curve idea is, it's a little bit like amoebic dysentery. Once it gets in your system, you're never completely rid of it. You may have no symptoms and live a healthy life, but you can't ever quite get rid of it. It's the same with the idea of the bell curve. I once worked for years with a woman named Beverly Daniel Tatum. We were hired to create a course. It was called Anti-Racist Teaching for the suburbs of Boston. And the reason for the course was there's a busing program where mainly African American but also Latino kids are allowed to get in the queue and be bused to the wealthy suburbs to improve their educational chances. So this was a course for white teachers in the suburbs in order to help them acknowledge the influence of racism on the view of the children and the way they were treated and all that. So anyway, Beverly was an expert on the racism part, and I was the person about the teaching part. So we worked together in developing this course, and I learned a lot from her. She said at one point about racism, something that I want to propose is true also for the bell curve. She said, if you live in Los Angeles, you breathe smog because it's in the air. Now, when you meet somebody from Los Angeles, you don't look at them with disdain and say, you smog breather. Because they can't help it. It's in the air. You can't live there but breathe that in. And I would propose it is the same thing with the bell curve. You cannot grow up in this country without inhaling it as an assumed truth. I certainly did. At the dinner table, I shared this story with your group, that, you know, my mother would say, Uncle Don was so smart. You know, he got all A's and he never had to bring a book home. And I would say, well, what about Uncle Vic? And she'd say, well, Uncle Vic got A's too, but he had to work so hard. So the implicit notion that Don was gifted intellectually and didn't have to work to get A's. Now, you know, I didn't know enough as I was growing up with my two uncles to sort of inquire into that with them. And they passed away before I could. But I do know that Vic was a very, very successful man and had strengths that Don didn't have. So it's a sort of an unresolved part of my family history. But I wonder tonight as you drive home if you can reflect on the family views that your relatives have of other people in the family and how conditioned it is by this assumption. Something came to mind then?
Well, I'm just curious how far you'll take this. And so, do you think, if we relate it back to an IQ, somebody with an IQ of 75
No.
to be a surgeon?
No, because it's usually the organic brain damage that's caused that. I do
Okay,
not.
85.
Well, I think that if you talk to people who teach retarded children, that they will say that if we really provide, and Alfred Binet, by the way, was one of them, if you really provide good education for them, you can get them to outperform the stereotypes we have of children who are retarded. But they probably never be brain surgeons. No. So I'm not going to take it to the point where a child with organic damage can do Gallifrey. But I am going to propose that low performance, that kids who come up to you and say, Mr. Saphire, this is on, this is like say 7th grade math, and they have a 6th grade placement test, which is the first time sort of them into those. Nobody in my family was ever good at math. I appreciate the extra help you're trying to give me, but it's not going to work. My father told me he was no good at math. What I'm going to say immediately, well, he would have been if he had equal people. Because there's nothing wrong with your father's math brain. There was just gaps in what he knew. And there are in yours, there are gaps in what you know too. Nothing wrong with, come on, sit down here. We're going to fill in some of those gaps. We're going to figure out what they are. Okay. Now, one of the ways in which this belief shows up in teacher behavior is one is alert to those assumptions when kids say them, and you push back on it. It doesn't mean everybody's going to get to be world class in every academic subject, but we have kids who give up real early. I mean, if you happen to conclude you haven't got it, and what you haven't got it about is handwriting, well, you know what? You're going to do okay in life. If it's sports, you'll find something else, or you'll try and find something else where you can be seen. That's why extracurricular programs in comprehensive high schools throughout the last century have been so important. But if you happen to conclude about reading in the 3rd grade, and you're really, really in trouble, I'm not one who can read. If you concluded about math, you cut yourself off from lots of possibilities in life. And it can happen at any time in your life. I'll use myself as an example. I got really good grades in math all the way through high school. I actually thought I was pretty good. And then I got to college and I had my first calculus course. And I was absolutely buffalo. I couldn't figure out what the hell are my French. This guy was talking about it, and everybody else in the class seemed to be doing all right. Never mind, I didn't know that they had pre-calc in high school. So I concluded by the end of September, freshman year, oh, I always thought I was good at math, but I guess I was wrong. And I never took another math course again. Got out of it as soon as I could. I didn't realize until decades later that I had a lousy teacher. He was not very good at explaining things. And the other kids in the class had enough prior knowledge so they could get through anyway. Now, why did I reject 17 years of success in mathematics? Because he was a nice guy. He invited kids, including me, over to his house for dinner. He had 3 young children, and he had fluky pets, boa constrictors, and ferrets, and, he was just such a cool guy. It had to be me there's something wrong with. And what I would propose is there's a little bit of that in all of us, and I want to do an exercise now to try that out. Every one of us, even though now I've only done okay at math, had I had better teaching and decided it was worthwhile, I would have been better. But every one of us has something we know actually we're not good at. It could be math or science. It could be formal writing. It could be athletics. It could be singing or dancing, or it could be mixing at cocktail parties or any large social gatherings. I just get nervous and I'm fine with the one. So whatever it is, there's something like that all the time. So I want you to think for a minute about what it is. Name the thing for you, which is the thing you're not good at. You've known it for a long time. Just take a second. Okay. Now, what I want you to do is a private activity for about 2-3 minutes or so. I want you to take in your notes. What was the event that happened at which time you decided you're not good at that? Something happened. Somebody said something where you got a bad result, a bad grade, or something happened. What was the event? When did you know? That's the first thing to write down. The event. One of the people in our group, RBT, Greg Sherry, for him the event was third grade. The third grade chorus at holiday concert time. All the third graders from school are lined up on the stage. There's a little break between songs, and the music teacher comes up to him and says, "Greg, just mouth the words." The second thing I'd like you to write down is what your feelings were. And then the third thing is, what were the consequences or the after effects, the impact on future events, your choices or whatever. Event, feelings, consequences or impacts. I'm going to share a little bit of this information. I'd like to ask you to go around and say who you are to the people at your table and what you do in your professional setting. Take a minute to do that. Make sure you know the name and what everybody does. Here's what I'd like you to do. I don't take time to go over everybody, but I would like at least 3 people at each table, if they're willing, to share those 3 things. What is it that you know you're not good at? And then the event, the feelings, and the consequences. And I'll let the volunteers start. Just do it at your table for the members of your table. We're good at that. It's just that you could socially say, "Oh no, that's not." Whatever. Most of the time, when you get to the consequence line, the consequence is, "I never did it again," or the goosebumps come up and I move away as quickly as possible, or I make a joke out of it and I let the other people take over and I go do something else. Now, I know because this thing or 2 or 3 at which we all feel we're really not any good is so deep that it's very hard to accept a person like me saying, "You know what, you're really wrong. You could have been good at that if you wanted to, if you had the right kind of support and practice it enough so that you were willing to get better at it." And it's especially hard to accept for things that appear to be physical, like singing. We identify that as somehow a natural gift. And yet when you study people who become great at singing, you see how hard they worked at it. This is a story in my family about one of my sons, who I also always tell him that. We gather around the piano at holiday time and sing Christmas carols and stuff. And he never seemed to hit the notes to me. But fortunately, I have 4 kids, and Margie and I, and fortunately, nobody ever said anything or rolled. All it takes sometimes is that can be it. So with Graham, I never rolled my eyes or said anything, and so then when he went to high school, it turned out that year the cool thing was the high school musical. All the cool kids did the musicals. So he went out for the musical, and somehow, unbeknownst to me, he got a part in the musical. The musical that year was a chorus line, and he's the last kid in the chorus line who has 1 solo line to sing. So you know how high school musical goes. 2 weekends separated by a week, and and all the family goes, and then it's over and all that. So we all go to listen to Graham sing. But when it gets to him and he sings his line, it's relatively on key. You know? And I go, parents do fine. We congratulate him and we move on. Everything's fine. So then he comes up to me in June or May, just before school's out, and he says, "Dad, I want to take voice lessons." And I'm thinking about my wallet. And he wants to take voice lessons from John Labella, who is the musical director of the musical. Now, John Labella is a volunteer. He lives in town, or he lives in Boston, and he's best friends with the math teacher, who's the drama director. But John's a professional voice coach. He has a studio on the top of a high-rise Victorian building in downtown Boston, over the Fenway, and he has pictures of black and white glossies of his very successful graduates around the room, the grand piano in the living room, this big. None of this do I find out until later on, because when Graham says, "Dad, I want to take voice lessons," I am an educator, and I cannot discourage the natural initiative to learn something. So on we go, and I take Graham in the first Saturday morning in late June, and that's when I get to see this apartment and the pictures and everything. He says, "Well, hello, John. Nice to see you. Graham, terrific you're here. Lie down on the floor." So Graham lies down on the floor and he does breathing exercises for half an hour. He never sings it. No. And I'm thinking about my wallet. Finally, I can't stand it any longer, and I go down to Einstein, bagel bakery. Every other weekend, the rest of the summer, I don't even go up. I bring my education magazines, and I catch up on my reading at the bagel store. And Graham goes around the house singing also like a madman. But it's getting better and better and better. And by the end of the summer, he has this glorious tenor voice that I cannot believe. And he goes out for the musical again, and he gets the lead in the High School Musical that year as a sophomore. So I'm telling the story to the musical director of Cambridge City High School, because I have just videotaped him doing a band rehearsal. He asked me to do it, and I'm debriefing it with him as I do with a lot of teachers in different places. And he's listening to me tell this story, looking bored. And I'm telling it with the same kind of animation and enthusiasm I'm telling you, because it still strikes me as astounding. So he's sitting there looking bored, and when I get to the end of the story, I say, "Charlie, don't you find that exciting? I mean, novel? Unusual?" And he says, "Well, you know, John," as if I'm the village idiot, "each of us has a voice within." Like, you know, don't you know anybody that really wants to learn how to sing can learn how to sing? You dummy, in parentheses. And, you know, that was 25 years ago. And it was a real, I was just starting to read all this stuff about it. It's not just what you're born with, it's how much effort you put in, whether you get good coaching and the right strategies. And my entire, I'm about to be 70. Through my mid-40s, I never questioned the devil. That's the nature of it. And I had started to question it before this incident with Graham, but it really kind of like started me thinking seriously about it. And the way I had used that assumption to pigeonhole certain kids that I had in my teaching. I was a classroom teacher for 10 years, high school history, 5th grade, then 2nd grade, then 1st grade, 3rd grade. So I'm telling you this because I've come by this shift the hard way. And I'm inviting you to at least suspend disbelief about the bell curve being true, to consider the other one and use it as a way to start examining the way in which the bell curve belief shows up in our vocabulary and in inadvertent differential treatment of students. Inadvertent, because nobody wants to treat kids differently. And we all believe, I certainly did, that we treat kids equally. And even if you think John is dumber than Sheva, you're convinced you don't treat him any differently, except that it may not be. There was a staff development program that a few of you may remember called TESA. A long time ago, TESA, Teacher Expectations, Student Achievement. And it derived from the Rosenthal and Jacobson study in the 60s called Pygmalion in the Classroom. Pygmalion in the very fact, these two researchers run the Today Show. This is about 6 hosts ago. And I didn't see it, although I was grown up by the time. I was in the army. Anyway, what they did is they took IQ scores and they mixed them up and they gave phony IQ scores to kids' teachers. Phony IQ scores. At randomized, so that some kids who were actually average or low IQ, the teacher would thought, oh, she's 132. And vice versa. Some of the really high-scoring kids were given artificial scores. And the point of the study to make that, the teachers practice certain behaviors regularly and more with the kids they thought were high IQ kids. And the behaviors were smiling more, asking harder questions, using more wait time, nodding. And there's 13 behaviors in that protocol. Now here's the other thing. By the end of the year, the academic achievement of the kids reflected the distribution of the phony IQ scores. And here's the final kicker. The kids with the low IQ scores, who had phony high IQ scores, went up in IQ when retested a year later. The kids with authentically lower IQ scores at the beginning of the year, whom the teachers thought had high IQ scores, tested higher in IQ after receiving the treatment as if they were the smart kids. So, based on the story of George Bernard Shaw, Pygmalion, and then My Fair Lady, which is the musical version of that, where Eliza Doolittle gets transformed from a street waif who's a Cockney into an elegant, high-toned, well-spoken woman by Professor Henry Higgins. Right. So this is transforming the student's performance and view of self by virtue of how they're treated by teachers who have certain views of their ability. Now, that list of 40 things there is the syllabus where we ever do this here of all the ways in our practice we would reflect this belief that kids are able, in our practices, in our classroom routines, things like that. So I just put it out there as a preview of how big the implications of this are. Some of the practices are interactive and verbal, like the one that we saw. Some of them have to do with classroom routines, like teaching kids explicitly to keep track of their own quiz results and analyze their own errors. I'm going to show some, in the course that Judy is in, I'm going to show clips that none of those folks have seen before about what it's like in high school and middle school and elementary school. I'm going to start with high school, where a person who has 42-minute periods, they're short, takes on this notion of getting all the kids to learn how to analyze their own work and improve their practice. So you do goal setting with the kids, a whole bunch of associated practices like that. And he's in his 16th year as a teacher. He didn't do this for 15 years. In his 16th year he did, and he's gotten astounding results with his kids. And those kids, he teaches Japanese. Those kids in their second year are carrying all these things forward and continuing. As far as he can, this is not really a study, it's one group of kids. They seem normal, and then every way we can determine from any other group that have had. So anyway, not only verbal behaviors, but classroom structures, retakes. He gives a quiz a week, and you have to get 80. If you don't get 80, you have to retake it because you do. And you can't just retake it because you want to. You have to do something that indicates that you have odds of getting better the next time. So it's not like a free pass. But the highest grade you get is the grade you get, instead of averaging the first one and the second one. Implicit message. It's not speed I value. It's care, quality, craftsmanship, and mastery that I value. And that idea that speed equals smart gets implanted so early. Does this ring any bells with you? Let's say it's 8th grade and you're responding to an open-ended question on an essay text. The room is, it's us. We're the pooled 8th grade, so to speak. And there's 10 minutes left in the test. And from the front of the room, which is over there where Karen and Kay are sitting, you hear the following.
Then you started.
What's just happened? That Kay, she always finishes. Why can't I ever do that? She's so darn
Smart.
And so it's what's interesting is that kids aren't born believing that ability is innate. John Nichol did a study in the late 70s of young children, 4 and 5-year-olds. When you ask kindergarten kids to identify the good students, they can do it. It starts that early, who the good students who are not. But if you ask them how come they're good students, the generic trend of their answer is because they do their work. And for very young children, the idea of the concept of ability and the concept of effort is smushed together. It's kind of like ability effort. And it starts to differentiate early in the grade. By the time you get to 4th grade, it's really differentiated. And by 6th, 7th, 8th grade, it is for sure that the answer will be this. Can you tell me who the good students are? Oh yeah, sure. How come? Because they're smart. It's very fixed. So, now here's one little final thought experiment. Suppose we were going to design a school system from the assumption that the bell curve is absolute truth. What would be some of the policies and the practices and the procedures that you would see in such a school system? Now we need one person to be a recorder. I'm going to give you 9 seconds to brainstorm this at the table. One person who is generous beyond belief. Volunteer to be the record keeper for your table. Just to say yes. This is worth a lot more time. So let's just do a little collecting. I'm going to go around each table, give me one thing you can start off with. Reach to the middle. Gotcha. What's one from here?
Level reading.
Leveled reading group. Where, incidentally, you tend to stay for your entire elementary career. Tracking. And it's called tracking at the secondary level. What's one you all have?
We had a problem.
No, I didn't say it.
Wrong way. Yeah.
Pardon? You did it the other way around?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll just hold on to those, because
Yeah.
that's coming in. Definite tag programs and special ed programs. A high preponderance of kids going into special ed and teachers early on identifying kids, especially in secondary school, who should be moved to special ed. Because that's really where they fit. Right? What's one you all have? One from here?
Community perpetuating beliefs about the level of school itself relative to other schools.
And they tend to be, so the schools are sort of attached to practice, as well as within schools. What's one that you folks have?
Yeah, we were tracking them, and then of course, just, the college courses, but no college programs.
Right. And we even see it in counselors' advice to kids. Some of you may have had advice that somehow you overcame. Is there anybody here who's in that category? Yeah? What are some of those we didn't get yet that were part of this profile? Just yell it out.
Having grades in which up to 70% is basically considering failing.
Just say it once again.
Having grades at which up to 70% is basically considered failing.
More? Any others?
Different curriculum for the different tracks.
Pardon?
Different curriculum for the different tracks.
Yes, that's right. Different curriculum, different materials for different tracks. Easier tests, harder tests for kids within the same group. And you may give kids who did well on the easier test good grades, but you know they really don't equal the grades up here, so maybe you give weighted credit to the kids who are earning grades in the harder courses. Yep. Anything else? Let's do the flip now for 90 seconds. Suppose you design a school system from the assumption that the truth is that effort is the main thing that determines how one succeeds in school. And you want to convince all the kids that effective effort is really the thing they need to learn. And if they're behind, they're behind. That's a fact. But it isn't because there's anything wrong with their brains. What are some of the policies you'd see? Some of the practices you'd see? And some of the procedures that you'd see? Go. This table, since you've done it twice. Go. Policies, practices, procedures that you see.
One way I would want to have something structured into the school day that allowed for that extra effort for kids to, like you said, adapt to the teacher, make up the quiz and do it again. That was sort of built in, and each kid would have a time of the day they could go to the subject area and they needed a little more effort.
Evanston Township High School, Evanston, Illinois, high school, 3,200 kids. The first period of every day is that. Exactly what you said. That's right. Every teacher's in their classroom. And kids who don't choose to go anywhere, there's 4 big cafeterias where they're supervised study for a 32-minute period. Keep going. What's another one or two you go on?
That college admission would not be so SAT-based. And that schools would not be so standardized test-based.
Not so standardized test-based, right? Many alternative assessments. What was the one you said about time? Well, first of all, you were talking about getting here.
We said that it wouldn't, so like right now at the high school level, like you're required to have 3 years of math, but it doesn't specify the math level. So it wouldn't be that you have to have 3 years of math, it would be you have to get through advanced algebra or whatever. You have to get to this level of ability. It doesn't matter if it takes you 6 math classes or 1, you have to reach this level of ability. And then I took it to the advanced of high school, but it obviously would start at kindergarten. But high school could take 6 years, but it could also take 2. But there's not it's not like you have to finish in 4 years or you're a failure and a super senior. It just, however long it takes you to get there, that's what you do.
So the mastery criteria would be very clear, and it's the attainment of that which is recognized, not the speed with which you get there. And the corollary of that, I think, is what you were talking about, that you once had in schools, which is that kids who are behind get increased resources so you can accelerate the rate at which they grow. So that was a rationale for having an assistant in every class.
With all included, these were with special needs kids in the classroom. I was part of the project in California, the school I worked at, where we brought that to our school. And these were, some of them significantly impacted students. And this was K through 6, and it was dramatic, the change in 2 years. Shocking. I mean, for those of us who thought to make it happen, it wasn't shocking, but it was so incredible to see behaviorally and academically how they excelled. But the way we did it was, those of us who fought to get this implemented made sure that each gen ed teacher that ran the classroom had a full-time assistant working with her or him to work with the kids, groups, behavioral interventions, whatever needed to be done, and it made all the difference in the world. And those kids, I mean, really, it was just a tremendous progress from me.
I would propose that the structure facilitated largely the results you got, but other places where there's an instructional assistant in every class and they have inclusion, and they don't get those results. Yeah. Because they don't start from the belief that if we really put our shoulders to the wheel, we could, and they did. Those kids did.
Well, it was individually oriented because all of these students had specific needs and programs and emphasis for what they particularly needed to succeed in their classroom. You know, there's a lot of work involved. A lot of work involved in teaching and all kinds of working with the teacher, but it worked.
Right. What's one from your table here, or 2?
We also talked about grades. Provisions would get blurred. They were proficiency-based. Peer coaching.
Peer coaching of kids by kids?
Yes. More collaboration.
Yes.
more equally mixed ability groups.
Yep.
No SPED and no PAC.
Yeah, because tag kids get what they need in terms of challenge in the regular ed class. So it becomes more challenging for me as a teacher, but by the same token, I'm committed to it and I have more resources in place to do it. Other ideas from any table that we don't have yet.
Well, granted, this is kind of in contradiction to the last thing you just said in some respects. However, like right now, the only diploma types that count are regular high school diplomas. So to have all kinds of diploma types count to reward student effort because they've earned it. And they move forward in whatever area in which they needed to based on whatever the diploma type kind of landed on.
For sure, the reward system of the school would recognize effective effort and progress, as well as being a star football player. You know, the reward system of the school is manifested in the cabins and in the hall. Nothing wrong with recognizing the championship football team, but this is elementary schools, but you can tell what is valued by the things that are highlighted. And what we want to show here is that it's accelerated progress, and the exertion of effective effort is a very valued thing in the school. So we have kids self-evaluate themselves on effective effort, and we create a rubric for it. This is the definition that we've used for decades in the Skillful Teacher. Effective effort is 6 things. First of all, time. This is a cognitive thing. Understanding how much time it takes to revise an essay. And 2 of my 4 children thought 5 minutes was really all what was expected in that. It was cognitive. You won't get the result you want unless you put in the time. And you have to decide, or at least estimate, how much time it will take. The second one is focus, getting rid of distractions and knowing how to do that. The third attribute of effective effort is learning actual strategies to use when you meet obstacles. A kid who believes in the bell curve may do very well in school until they run into obstacles. Then they interpret the obstacle, as I did, as calculus. Oh, I can't do that. And they avoid it or give up. Whereas a kid who believes that ability can be grown encounters an obstacle and says, oh, there must be something missing that I need to learn how. Where can I go to get the help I need or get the information filled in? And that's resourcefulness, knowing where to go and whom to ask. Now, the one about feedback actually requires that I, as a teacher, be fairly good at it. If I'm not giving the kid useful feedback, they can't use it. But a kid who believes in malleable ability looks for how to use the feedback to get it better. One of the sessions that we did earlier in the year that few of you attended was about the teacher side of the skill of giving good feedback. It feeds into effort-based ability. Because if I bother to take the time to do it, could give you good feedback, it must mean I think you could use it. And I wouldn't take the time unless you were worth it. And also, one of the characteristics to remember is it's non-judgmental. It compares the performance to the exemplar and just shows you what's missing. And then the last attribute is, as a kid, being committed, being determined to finish and do the very best work you can. Now, once you start getting a little bit of success and have a teacher who is believing in you enough to put in the extra time and effort to get you clear saying what the criteria for success are, you start getting more committed because you see the teacher. So these 6 things then become a rubric, or at least a criteria checklist that you periodically ask the kids to do on themselves. And I was in a person's room today where the kids give themselves a grade, and then the teacher gives them a grade later, and the kids self-evaluate on effective effort, and then the teacher reflects on his views, and it's the science teacher, of how they've done. So, we're out of time. Well, here's what I'm hoping for as a result of what we've done today. You'll listen and look to the conversations of people around you and the media for representations of the bell curve view as opposed to the effective effort. And the second thing I'm hoping is that you'll look for little moments of opportunity for you to start hammering away at the stereotype that low confidence kid has about him or herself. By pushing back in some way and looking over those 40 things and seeing if there's any way you could try some experiments with that kid.